My good friend Deep Joshi, Dr. G. Moloney, members of the IRMA board, graduating class of 2013, parents, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to congratulate IRMA and its board for adopting two civilized customs and practices as part of the convocation. The first one is obvious. The dress code is, in my view, eminently suited for the Indian climate and does not force me to remove my gown, which I have done on many an occasion. But the second custom, which is equally important, I feel, is not insisting on a written convocation address. Because you can be guaranteed that any person who comes with a written convocation address has got it written for him or her by somebody else. And therefore, when Deep Joshi asked me, sent word to my office, said that he wants a text of my lecture, I had to tell him, and I'm glad that he accommodated my request, that I will not go and deliver a convocation address which insists on a written address, because then you can take the address as read. Why call the speaker in any case? Because the speech is circulated well in advance, and I'm just reading and you're just following what I'm saying. So I'm delighted that IRMA has broken with the past, and I too join Deep Joshi in recalling and paying my own tribute to the memory of IRMA's founder, Dr. Kurian, with whom I shared a very turbulent and rocky relationship over the years, to say the least. And little did I realize that when I first met him, he would often make fun of his bosses sitting in Kursi Bhavan, his way of referring to Krishi Bhavan. Little did I realize that one day I would be an occupant of Kursi Bhavan. And I'm always reminded of those wonderful anecdotes that Dr. Kurian, accompanied by Dr. Patel in room 555 of Ashoka Hotel, would regale us, Mr. Petroda particularly, on his various run-ins with the Indian bureaucracy and the Indian political establishment. But I do believe that Dr. Kurian's central insight to link the rural producer with the urban consumer, it's blindingly obvious today, but it was not obvious 50 years ago. It is still subject to severe attacks from the likes of Claude Alvarez and Shanti George, and occasionally P. Sainath. But I do want to stress that this fundamental insight that he brought into the marketing of milk, we have tried to replicate in other areas as well. We have not had the same degree of success that Dr. Kurian had with milk. That's a different story. Why we could not replicate the NDDB model in spite of our best efforts in the field of edible oils, for example, or in the field of tree growers, cooperatives, or in the field of handicrafts and handlooms. There's no dearth of trying to replicate the NDDB model. Milk remains a monument to this brilliant insight of Dr. Kurian 50 years ago, that you cannot take the rural producer out of poverty without linking the rural producer to a growing urban market. And I think this lesson of Dr. Kurian is worth recalling. I'll come back to this during the course of my convocation address, because I do believe that rapid urbanization in India will have a positive effect on the alleviation of rural poverty. We tend to look upon urbanization and rural development as two separate boxes. They're not. And there is a wealth of evidence to show, as I will explain to you later, that urbanization, in fact, can create the conditions for faster poverty alleviation over and above the impact of the direct poverty alleviation programs that the government mounts. First, I want to congratulate the graduating class. I was talking to the director, and normally when I go to convocations these days, usually my empirical, casual empiricism is that 45 to 50% of the graduating class are girls. I'm sorry that IRMA has fallen short of this norm. Today I'm told only 30% are graduating class of girls, but I'm told next year it's going to be 49%. So in which case you would be knocking on a national norm, and I want to congratulate all the women particularly who have graduated. The second point I want to make about your graduating class is I didn't find the regional diversity that I expected. Now, you're a National Institute of Rural Management. Although don't put that on your letterhead, because the acronym will then become NIRMA, not IRMA. But you are an Institute of Rural Management which draws from the national catchment area. And I didn't see many people from the Northeast. I didn't see many people from Jammu or Kashmir or any of the other parts. And the third and most important aspect which I want to underscore, and I hope Deep Joshi and the members of the IRMA board will not misunderstand what I have to say and will not think that I'm abusing your hospitality. But I don't think that you can run IRMA with a 25 crore grant from the Ministry of Rural Development without introducing reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. You must have affirmative action. You cannot claim to be a national institute of rural management where the challenges of Dalits and Adivasis are central and not have affirmative action in your admission. There's a disconnect here. And I think so far you were protected because you didn't take money from the government. Now you've made the mistake of taking the money from the government. You've taken 25 crores from us. And I didn't know this, Mihir, by the way. I just discovered this in the morning. But please make sure that in the Planning Commission conditionality that you put, that this 25 crore grant will be accompanied by the introduction of reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes for students. I think it's very, very important. And I think many of you will subscribe to this idea. You will have transition problems. I'm sure IIMs have transition problems. IITs have transition problems. But over a period of time, you will overcome these problems, and I think you will generate a cadre of professionals belonging to the disadvantaged groups, which you claim you are going to serve as part of your mandate. So I think this is very, very significant. I request Deep to take a personal leadership role in this regard and ensure that from 2014-15 at least, you make a conscious effort to introducing reservations for Dalits and Adivasis, and also reach out to some of the parts of India from which you are not getting an incoming class. Now, I want to use this opportunity of sharing with you some issues on rural management which you will confront as you go into the field as managers. I'm not going to give you any advice, but I'm just going to give you some facts. And I'm just going to give you some observations based on my personal experience, both positive and negative. And it's for you to relate your own experience with what I have to say. First, let me start with the dimensions of change in rural India. Rural India is changing and changing very significantly. Change has both a positive dimension and a negative dimension. And let me highlight for you what I consider are 4 very fundamental positive changes that are occurring across the length and breadth of rural India. First, there is a consumption revolution that is going on in rural India. People are consuming more. People's consumption habits are changing. Engel's curve is working. People are diversifying their food habits from a dependence on cereals into milk, eggs, protein, meat. You talk to any FMCG company and they will tell you that the great frontiers of marketing today are in rural India and not necessarily in urban India. You look at what's happening to agricultural growth. Who would have thought 10 years ago that Madhya Pradesh would be the second largest contributor of wheat to the central pool after Punjab? Who would have thought 10 years ago that Chhattisgarh would be the third largest contributor to the central pool on rice? Who would have thought that Odisha and Assam, traditional rice importers, are today knocking on contributing to the central pool in very large numbers? 25 years ago, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi went to Kalahandi and declared Kalahandi to be the poverty bowl of India. And today Kalahandi is the second largest rice producer in Odisha. And in 3 years from now, will be the largest rice producer in the state. So the agricultural revolution today has gone well beyond Punjab, Haryana and Western UP. It has come into Rajasthan, it has come into Madhya Pradesh, it has come into Chhattisgarh, it has come into Orissa, it's come into Assam, it's always been in Tamil Nadu and Andhra. So large parts of rural India today are seeing agricultural growth. And that is what is driving partly this consumption revolution. The increase in real wages, for which Mahatma Gandhi Narega has been a very major stimulant. Real wages in the last 5 years have gone up 4 times greater than in the previous 5 years. And that's one of the contributory factors is the upward pressure on rural wages exerted by the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program. All this, the increase in rural wages, the spread of agriculture, all this is leading to a consumption boom in rural India. 25 years ago, motorcycles were never sold in this country. Just to give you a trivial example, 25 years ago, the two-wheeler that was sold was a scooter. The most prized item in a dowry was a Bajaj scooter. No longer. You see today, the ubiquitous symbol of mobility is the motorcycle. And part of it is because of this consumption revolution that I'm talking about. So the first positive element which we have to acknowledge is that consumption habits are changing. There is a consumption urge, a consumption aspiration driven by various factors in which agricultural growth and the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program have played a very important role. The second positive aspect in rural India, there has been a connectivity revolution. In the last 10 years, 4 lakh kilometers of rural roads have been built. It's not a small amount. 100,000 habitations have been connected. In 10 years' time, 400,000 kilometers of all-weather roads, blacktop roads, have been built to connect 100,000 habitations. These are roads that exist. These are roads that you can see on the ground. These are roads that are being maintained. And these are roads that are leading to what Dr. Kurian envisaged, a link between rural producers and urban markets. Alongside the revolution in rural roads and its multiplier effects has come the connectivity revolution through mobile telephony. And today, this is the most visible instrument of empowerment in rural India. And I will have occasion to talk about this later, that today rural India has more mobile phones than toilets, which I think is very unfortunate as far as women are concerned. But the fact of the matter is today, almost 500 million mobile phones in rural India. It's not a small sum. And it's being used not just for communication, but is also being used, as Robin Jeffries has shown in his new book, it is also being used for extracting better value for markets. So the second element of positive transformation is the connectivity revolution through rural roads and through mobile telephony. The third positive transformation in rural India is the revolution in representation. There are 30 lakh elected representatives today in rural India. Elected. Now, there are lots of infirmities in this electoral process. Caste plays a very important role in this electoral process. Local strongmen play a very important role in this process. And sometimes people you don't want get elected. In Bihar, you have a term called MP and SP. And I went to a village in Bihar and I found 4 MPs and 3 SPs. And I was shocked. I thought, यहाँ तो सिर्फ एक MP होता है और एक SP होता है. Till somebody told me, साहब यहाँ तो MP माने मुखियापति और SP माने सरपंचपति. But the fact of the matter is, representation today is institutionalized. Some chief ministers, of course, go out of the way to postpone the revolutions. One chief minister is doing her best to postpone it. But the fact of the matter is, 30 lakh elected representatives, 2.5 lakh elected institutions, 30 lakh elected representatives, of whom 45% are women, on a reservation platform of 33%, but in most states of India now, reservation for women is 50%. And there is increasing evidence to show that where institutions of representation have actually been empowered, both financially and administratively, you're getting better outcomes in health, in education, in forest management, and a variety of social services. And the fourth and final positive transformational element that I would talk about is the revolution in participation, as opposed to the revolution in representation, which comes through the electoral process. The revolution in participation has come through a voluntary association of women's self-help groups. And today you have 25 lakh women's self-help groups across the country with about 3 crore women as members. And every year, banks give about 17,000 crores to these self-help groups. So these self-help groups are not standalone self-help groups, but these are bank-linked self-help groups. Although 80% of this 17,000 crores is in just 4 states of Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Kerala, we are now seeing a remarkable growth in self-help groups in states like Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Assam, and certainly parts of Uttar Pradesh. So as you go out to rural India, as I'm sure all of you will, keep an eye out for these 4 transformations which I talk about. First, the transformation in consumption. Second, the transformation in connectivity. Third, the transformation in representation and its institutions. And fourth, the transformation in participation, particularly through women's self-help groups. Now, no glass in India can be half full. And it's often been said about our country that whatever you say in India, the opposite must necessarily be true. And therefore, for all of these positives, there is a downside negative as well. And I think it would be intellectually dishonest on our part if we don't recognize what these problems are. Some of these problems are deep-rooted problems, brought about by the structure of rural society, brought about by the persistence of caste discrimination. But I venture to suggest to you that increasingly many of the problems are a consequence of the growth process itself. That our success is breeding both a positive transformation as well as a negative impact. And as rural managers, your challenge would be to take the positives forward while at the same time recognizing and dealing effectively with the negatives. Now, what are these negatives? I think the most significant aspect of rural poverty today, which is not recognized by economists, it's certainly not recognized by large sections of the media, that today the collapse of the public health system is perhaps the single greatest contributor to people falling below the poverty line. In fact, this concept of a poverty line is an artificial construct. You have, as opposed to a line, you have actually a vulnerability zone. Families become vulnerable depending on their expenditure on various aspects. Social expenditure, like expenditures on marriage, and increasingly, as all surveys have demonstrated, expenditure on health. In 2004, the NSS estimated that 10% of rural households who became BPL because of expenditure on health alone. Subsequent surveys by various researchers in different parts of the country have shown that up to 30% of the poverty, people who go, poverty is a transient, there are people who live in permanent poverty, but there are communities who live, people who live in transient poverty, who go in and out of poverty. 30% of the people who go in and out of poverty go in and out of it because of expenditures on health. And today, you will see as you go and work in rural India, the rural health system has all but collapsed. And this, more than anything else today, is leading to rural indebtedness, and that in turn is leading to rural poverty. Paradoxically, the introduction of insurance schemes like the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, which was supposed to have solved this problem, is leading to an increase in out-of-pocket expenditure. Because what insurance schemes do is encourage expenditure on tertiary healthcare, whereas the fundamental requirement is primary health. So I think we must recognize the changing nature of rural poverty. Rural poverty is now no longer calorie poverty, which we have been debating for 50 years and which we keep measuring and on which economists generate PhD theses every year. And we have debates on these numbers. But the main contributor to rural poverty now is coming from an expenditure on health, by private expenditure on health caused by a complete collapse of the public health system in rural India. The second negative that you will see is ecological poverty. That poverty that is being caused by a degradation of land, poverty that is caused by restricted access to water, and certainly poverty that is being caused by an antiquated system of managing our forests. And increasingly, the protest movements that you are seeing against large steel plants, against large cement factories. In fact, Gujarat was the scene of a very major public protest against a cement factory. And the matter went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And when I was Minister for Environment and Forests, I had to deal with this. And I had to deal with it not as a cement question, but as a livelihood question. As a question of what it does for water for local communities. And it was on that ground, finally, that the Supreme Court upheld the order of the Ministry of Environment and Forests. So increasingly you're finding, in fact, 40 years ago, what was the Chipko movement all about? The Chipko movement in the hills of Uttarakhand, from where Deep Joshi comes from, was basically a movement for protecting natural resources, for giving local women control over how local resources are going to be used. Increasingly, degradation of land caused by various factors, natural as well as developmental, the inability to assure water, and certainly a very inequitable system of managing our forests, which treats every tribal who uses the forest for his or her daily existence as a criminal and as a violator of the Indian Forest Act of 1927, has created an extraordinary situation of very rich, natural resource-rich areas having the largest ratios of poverty. Just look at the mineral map of India. Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand and Odisha. 40 to 50% of the minerals located in these three states. But 60% of the poverty in these three states. It's not coincidental. So the second aspect that you will see is ecological poverty. And I think we need to put our minds and see how we are going to address this in a sustainable manner. Third, complete failure of the Indian state and of Indian society in the manner of sanitation. In my view, sanitation evokes only giggles in the audience. Nobody takes sanitation seriously. But today we have enough medical evidence to show that it is poor sanitation that is leading to high malnutrition. That stunted heights and low body weights of Indian children, over 40% of Indian children are malnourished even today. And this is a direct consequence of poor hygiene and complete lack of sanitation. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that unless we have a complete revolution in our approach to sanitation, we are not going to be able to make a dent on malnutrition. These are not independent issues, these are inextricably linked with each other. And I think sanitation is not just about building toilets, important as they are, but I think sanitation is fundamentally about behavioral change, the software, to make people aware of why it is important to have better sanitation practices. The fact that over 60% of Indian women today still defecate in the open, in state after state, should really be a matter of shame and anger for all of us. But this is something that we take for granted, saying that this is something that is part of Indian reality. But it should not be. And it need not be. And it must not be. Finally, on the negative part, I think you will find and you will be called upon to have an extraordinary sensitivity to the challenges in tribal India. If there is one community which has not got the full benefits of 60 years of economic growth in our country, it's the tribal community. And let's be very clear, we have not followed the American model of dealing with tribals. We have not exterminated our tribal communities. We have not followed the Australian model. We have not followed the European model. We are the only country in the world which is seeking to bring the tribals into the mainstream, whatever that mainstream may be. So it's a historic experiment that India has embarked upon. But I must say that after 50 years, tribal deprivation, tribal disconnect, tribal discontent is at its peak. And the direct reflection of this is the fact that you have 82 districts in India, largely in central India, largely in tribal India, mineral-rich districts, forest-rich districts, tribal-rich districts, which are also Maoist-affected districts. So these are not coincidences. These are all interrelated to each other. And if you want to deal with the challenge of Maoism and the spread of Maoist ideology in a humane and sensitive manner, you will have to give pride of place to the concerns of tribal communities, address the causes of tribal deprivation, relook at the way we manage our forests, relook at the way we approach mining, and bring about a much more sustainable and socially beneficial development strategy, which does not displace tribals, but makes tribal communities partners in the development process. So 4 positives: consumption, connectivity, representation, and participation. 4 negatives: health poverty, ecological poverty, the whole issue of sanitation poverty, and 4th, the issue of tribal deprivation. To my mind, this is, as I see rural India, and if you were to ask me, what will you experience when you go out there? You will see a lot of change, you will see a lot of innovation, you will see a lot of aspiration, you will see some of the positives that I have mentioned to you, you will see some of these challenges and negatives that I have talked about. And I think as rural managers, you will be called upon to address some of these issues. And I think it's a great opportunity for all of you to participate in a historic, in my view, effort to replicate what Dr. Kurian started 50 years ago in the area of milk. Deep Joshi has called for a partnership between the ministry and IRMA. I'm sure that we can build on this partnership so that the services of the graduating class are available not just to the state rural livelihood missions, as you mentioned, but across the board to institutions working in the field of rural transformation and rural development. as a politician, I'm aware of my own mortality, so I refrain from making any commitments on what I can do for you. But I think what we need to do is to build institutional linkages between the Planning Commission and the Ministry of Rural Development. I think it is possible to create avenues for the involvement of many of the graduating professionals into policy making and also field level activities. As you know, we have the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. It's a huge, ambitious task of creating almost we are going from 25 lakhs to 60 lakh self-help groups, 3 crore women to 7 crore women. We have the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. We have a whole plethora of rural development programs which are calling for professional expertise in implementation, in concurrent evaluation, and in program redesign. And I'm sure that between the Planning Commission and the Ministry of Rural Development in IRMA, we will be able to organize these institutional linkages. So once again, I wish you all the best, and I am confident that all of you will derive inspiration from the man who set up this institution and certainly follow in his footsteps of bringing excellence and dedication in whatever you set out to do. Thank you very much.
I now declare the convocation closed.